Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and very good evening on a Sunday evening. And I'm extremely delighted that in my series of Jan Ki Baat conversation, this is the 12th conversation. And I'm very, very delighted to have with me an extremely articulate guest. He is the National Vice President of the BJP. Mr. Baijayant Panda is joining me today. Thank you so much, sir. It's a pleasure to have you on the show and hope you are keeping safe during the time of COVID.
Thank you, Pradeep. It's a real pleasure. I've been following your wonderful work. You spent all those weeks on the ground covering the lockdown, and I'm eagerly looking forward to this interview. And yes, indeed, taking all precautions as mandated by public safety authorities.
Sure. Mr. Panda, I want to begin my interview with the thing which is extremely hot, and that is the interview of the Honorable Home Minister. The Honorable Home Minister has given an interview to ANI's main editor, Smita Prakash, and I want to pick a line which has gone massively viral. And I quote the Honorable Home Minister. He says, "Parliament honi chahiye, Parliament में चर्चा होनी चाहिए, करनी चाहिए. 1962 से आज तक जो भी हुआ है उस पे दो हाथ हो जाए." Now this comes at a very critical juncture because 4 hours back, Mr. Rahul Gandhi had tweeted, "कब होगी राष्ट्र सुरक्षा, राष्ट्र की रक्षा और सुरक्षा पर बात." How do you look at the statement of the Home Minister? Because this was the only message. Apart from that, the entire conversation largely was on how he was dealing with the COVID situation in Delhi. Do you look at this as a response to Mr. Rahul Gandhi? And are you optimist that after this, your main principal opposition party and your ideological rival will understand it?
I don't think Mr. Rahul Gandhi needs any response. I think the people of India are very familiar with him and what he does. It doesn't require any serious response. But there is something that I wish to say on this topic.
Oh.
This is a critical moment when India is facing a very severe challenge. The détente on the line of actual control has been broken after nearly half a century, and 20 Indian lives have been lost, as well as Chinese lives. Now, in this situation, as the Honorable Home Minister pointed out today, the government has taken a strong stand and is implementing certain very important steps. And in this environment, to try to needle not only the government, but needle the armed forces, question the veracity of what statements they are giving, to politicize the issue is extremely unfortunate. And, this is not something that the entire opposition is doing. A large number of the opposition parties have been responsible about it. And they have said that in a matter of a crisis like this, they are with the government. And that's what the parampara, the practice has been in India for decades. Now, but if you are to start needling the government and you start making these wild allegations, which are not backed up with any facts, then you can't see this as being in a vacuum. What has happened on in the Galwan Valley, on the LAC, and at these other areas is not as if it suddenly happened out of a vacuum. We have a history going back to even before 1962, how the Indian government dealt with the matter, how thousands of square kilometers were lost, how even, unfortunately, it's not as if these large tracts of land were lost to China only at the time of Prime Minister Nehru. Unfortunately, as recently as when Prime Minister Dr. Singh was in office, India lost land, and members of his party to pretend as if none of that ever happened, and suddenly India is losing land when it is not. And the Prime Minister has given a clear statement, and I trust and I believe our Prime Minister.
Absolutely, Mr. Panda. And in fact, it has been a tradition. And I remember the late Sri Arun Jaitley, when he was asked to support, when the incursions were going on, when and Mr. Antony was the defense minister, and he said it categorically that these were half measures, but we support it in national security. So the parliamentary tradition and generally the political tradition in this country has been of unanimous support in the matters of national security, bearing apart the recent tradition where we've seen Congress as an outlier. But my problem with you is, Mr. Panda, and I will tell you my problem is that massive corruption allegations have come up with respect to the Rajiv Gandhi Foundation. Now, I want to take the statement, the tweet of your Honorable President, Mr. J.P. Nadda, 2 days back, and I'm quoting this. One family's hunger for wealth has caused the nation immensely. If only they have devoted their energies towards more constructive agenda. The Congress imperial dynasty needs to apologize to the unchecked loot for self-gains. Now, Mr. Panda, you are in government. You are not in opposition. Why are you expecting your principal opponent, Congress party, ideological opponent Congress party, and particularly the Gandhis, for apologizing to you? Why are you not taking the actions? Why is it that all these corruption allegations are merely limited to certain 7 days of TV discussions? When will we see a situation where the investigative agencies will actually act on the ground? Because these are very, very serious allegations, Mr. Panda.
I think the apology that my party president, Shri Nadda ji, is asking for is not to us, but to the people of India. Because, all said and done, what he has said is factual. And the reality is that, the Congress was not always a dynastic party. Now, we may have differences with the Congress philosophy on certain issues or economics, but until the 60s, it was not a dynastic party. Now, there are, no, it's not just this example, but there are many, many, many instances where the Congress has hurt national interest. In fact, I would say even its own interest by playing to dynastic politics. Now, if you think about the issue, can a trust take money from Chinese embassy or the Chinese government? Now, that itself should be open to discussion. But the fact is, when it's a trust that is governed by people who are running the government, by people who are, the principal powers whose orders the then Prime Minister of the day was taking, then it raises the issue of conflict of interest. Now, the legalities of all of this have to be looked in, because Prime Minister Modi is very clear. He does not indulge in politics of vendetta. And no action will be taken unless it is corroborated by evidence, by investigations, and by facts. And any action that is taken should withstand a prosecution in court. So what you are asking for is reasonable, but in the medium to long term. You can't do that on a whim, but you can certainly ask politicians who are making all sorts of wild allegations themselves to answer, is there not a conflict of interest for them to be beholden to the Chinese government?
Mr. Panda, I absolutely understand your response, but my worry is bigger. My worry is that right now, the money which the Prime Minister's National Relief Fund diverted to a private trust which was owned by Srimati Sonia Gandhi was public money. It was my money, it was your money, it was the money of people of India. And this demands an investigation, is what is the sentiment on the ground. And I am not optimist, Mr. Panda, for two reasons. And I will give you the floor to explain that. Everybody right now is extremely angry that the corruption with respect to the Rajiv Gandhi Foundation, at least the prima facie evidences which are coming out, point at prima facie corruption. And this has been going on in the media from the past 6-7 days. Now, see what happened in the past corruption cases, Mr. Panda. On December 20, 2015, the National Herald, when the hearing in the Patiala High Court went, the Gandhis were set out on bail with a sum of 50,000 rupees. The Young India case had to be heard in March, and it is still pending to be heard in the court. Now, my question is, Mr. Panda, every rally of yours, of your party, and has been reiterating about the corruptions during the time of the Congress party. And this is why the Congress vanished from the political spectrum, which you also have rightly pointed out. But don't you feel, Mr. Panda, it is also your moral, ethical responsibility to punish the corrupt? So again, I'm trying to go specific on this. Can we expect that if these allegations of corruption have merit prima facie, because now it has been pointed out by your own party president, then it demands an investigation by the respective investigative authorities?
So, Mr. Bhandari, I appreciate your sentiment and where these questions are coming from. This is what the people of India are asking.
Sure.
But I think we are conflating two issues here, which I need to unpack and then explain. First of all, we know that our judicial system requires reform. Our judicial system is backlogged by not years, but by decades. And every case, not just this case, every case, including petty theft cases and other cases, murders and rapes, all take years to sort out. Now, we are not a banana republic. We are, unlike what the Congress sometimes claims, our government is not an authoritarian government. You can't overrule courts. You have to go through the court process. Now, it's a separate thing that Prime Minister Modi ji has repeatedly asked for reform in the courts, has tried to bring forward measures, and has appealed to the justices to bring about reform themselves. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is, I don't think the intent and the action of the Bharatiya Janata Party and the NDA government can be in doubt. Now, the difference is its predecessor was actively indulging in corruption. And you know how the scams happened with so many scams during the previous decade. Now, here is a government that is actively cracking down. Is this government not actively pursuing some of the big defaulters who are now evading Indian law and sitting abroad? Now, the same Congress people who are making wild allegations against us, it turns out have taken money from these defaulters directly into these trusts. So let's unpack the two issues. Our intent is very clear. This is a prime minister who does not tolerate corruption. And it's not just giving sermons, real action is being taken. Do you not see the historic actions taken when even senior officials in the civil service have been taken to task, have been removed from service? Now, when have you seen that in the past? How often have you seen that in the past? So very, very serious action against corruption is being taken. Today, you go and ask anybody, businessmen or others who are intimately acquainted with the system. Now, they may or may not like many aspects of our government, but nobody will tell you that this government has not reduced corruption. It has dramatically reduced corruption than its predecessor. So action will be taken, but the system has certain checks and balances, certain procedures have to be followed. And keeping that in mind, action will be taken. I urge you, and I urge your viewers to separately support the reforms that many of us have been asking for to remove the hurdles and the cobwebs in the judicial system.
Mr. Panda, I'm absolutely not doubting your intent. In fact, you've been voted back to power and you've been getting resounding support on the ground, and the Prime Minister particularly, because of his absolutely clear intent to take the country forward. This is the biggest thing, and I can tell you that. I'm not doubting the intent. My last question on this topic, and you would say that I'm going further on this, is I'm absolutely not doubting that today what we see, the system is much, much more transparent. It is not like the UPA era. I'm absolutely in agreement with you, and that's what the facts also tell. But let me ask you a political question. Are you worried that if you take actions against the Gandhis, and if the Gandhis and the Vadras go in the jail, they might use this as a political opportunity to revive? And that is your worry. Is that your worry, Mr. Panda? That is why when it comes to the Gandhis and the Vadras, you go all ballistic. But are you thinking that there is a bit of inhibition that if the Gandhis and the Vadras go to jail, and I'm very specific on this, Mr. Panda, if they go to jail, that might give a political revival to the Congress party?
Look, this Prime Minister, Narendra Modi ji, is not somebody who worries about the consequences of right action. I can tell you from even personal conversations and within the party discussions that when very bold steps have been taken, you know how he has changed the status quo. GST did not happen by accident. It required enormous heavy lifting behind the scenes. And it's a very disruptive change. Although it took away 17 taxes and brought it down to 4 levels, many in the business community who have been our supporters got affected. Now, that takes a lot of courage to do. Similarly, when the Balakot attack was authorized by the Prime Minister, it changed the status quo of many decades where Pakistan was using a nuclear shield to continue to do terrorism in India. So this is not a Prime Minister who worries about consequences as long as his decisions are correct and based on the right principles. Now, I think to put it bluntly, you are asking whether there is a political concern that taking action will lead to a sympathy factor
Yes.
for those who are accused. Now, look, here I must make it very clear. The Prime Minister has made it abundantly clear within government and within party that any action that must be taken, especially if it is taken against opposition people, not just these people in this party, but people in any party, that the old saying that Caesar's wife must not only be above suspicion, but must also appear to be above suspicion.
Yeah.
So this is a Prime Minister that requires that all the I's be dotted, all the T's be crossed. Every requirement as per law must be met before any action is to be taken. That is the only consideration.
Well, Mr. Panda, you are extremely articulate, and this is why I want to move towards my next set of questions. But I want to tell you, this is my personal opinion, that people on the ground really want the corrupt to be punished, irrespective of their political stature. You have done that with the civil services officials who are corrupt. You've got the businesses in order. You've got the phone call system of taking loans going. I do hope that if there are merit in these allegations, and if these allegations stand.
All those things have been done following proper procedure with checks and balances. Nowhere has a Tughlaki Farman been issued.
Yes.
Go get those guys.
Yes. Absolutely. But I can just tell you, this is my personal feeling, that if these, what has come out in the media domain with respect to taking money from the Chinese, I fear there also should be an investigation whether the Chinese tried to influence the Indian political process during that time. That is my individual opinion. I want to move towards the next part, and this is why I had said this. Mr. Panda, you had written a very, very, thought-provoking piece in in a national newspaper called Hindustan Times on June 22nd, 2020, where you say that the Modi government is rooted in Kautilyan principle. He will seek peace from strength. Now, many in the opposition, Mr. Panda, look at this as a sign of weakness, and they say that, I know you are laughing at it, but I can, there is a lot of, this is what they say. They say, Mr. Your party is more active when it comes to Pakistan and is less active when it comes to China. Now, how do you, respond to such criticism?
Well, first of all, that article, one half a minute background is necessary, is based on a principle that Harvard professor of history, Graham Allison, has pointed out, called the Thucydides trap, about from ancient times onwards, whenever there's an established power and there's a new rising power, the conflict usually leads to some kind of war, more often than not. And only a few times it has been avoided. So I was trying to see the India-China conflict in that context, because in the last 40 years, China went from being equal to India in economic terms to becoming 5 times bigger. And we lost many opportunities. Now, we are also rapidly catching up if you look at recent years. So the point is, it is only rational to treat Pakistan differently and China differently. Pakistan, in terms of population, is a fraction of our size. In terms of economy, is 1/10 of our size. Now, China is slightly more than our population, and the economy is 5 times our size. And so it would be irrational to suggest that we should treat China the same as Pakistan. Now, we must also recognize something that is becoming increasingly obvious. Going back to Vajpayee's government more than 20 years ago, then Defense Minister George Fernandez, for the first time, made a public statement that our real opponent is not Pakistan, it is China, in every sense of the term, economic and military concerns. Now, China has used Pakistan as a client state and has used it to act as a brake on India. Now, Pakistan itself is not a proper country. It's not a proper state. Everybody knows the civilian government does not have the final authority, unlike any other democracy. It's the army that decides, and they have their own vested interests. And so they were bluffing the world by using this nuclear umbrella theory to keep bleeding India, the philosophy of bleeding India by 1,000 cuts. And year after year, over many different administrations in India, we just kept wringing our hands and figured out, what can we do? There is the possibility of nuclear war. And so Modi ji made a very astute calculation and went ahead and destroyed that theory. that there is a huge gap between taking retaliatory action and between something reaching the nuclear threshold. Now, China is a different cup of tea. And to deal with China, one requires a different approach, different strategy, which is suitable for the requirement. And I think it's absolutely right that we must build up our strength. Our forces are ready. Our air force is capable of defending. Our Jawans are not only capable, they are showing that they have sacrificed themselves. But our infrastructure is far behind. China's infrastructure along the LAC is very advanced with Pakka blacktop roads. We are just now catching up. We have been very, very rapidly building that infrastructure. And that is one of the reasons many commentators have said that China wants to dissuade us and to push us back to keep inferior infrastructure so that in future conflict they can take advantage. So it is absolutely imperative, I think, that we use our time available to build the infrastructure and to deal with China appropriately.
Mr. Panda, at the outset, let me tell you that this conversation is getting massive traction. And I did not expect that to happen, but it is expected. It has happened, so it is good. And I want to go to the specifics of China, Mr. Panda. Let me tell my viewers just before the next question that, in fact, it is a travesty that how every time the target of Border Road Organization between 2009 to 2013 was set and it was not achieved. It was for the first time, in fact, this is to your credit, that we've been able to build substantial infrastructure to our border. That is to your credit. But let me tell you some reality on the economic front, Mr. Panda, and this is some harsh reality. 1.4 lakh crore of the electronic output to India, China sold had around 1.4 lakh crore of economic output to India in the last fiscal. 2018, the electronic phone market, the share of Indian electronic phone market, the Chinese had 81% of that. Number 3, Mr. Panda, is that the FDI. As of there was an article in the Indian Express which said that 23rd April 2020, when India tightened the FDI rules, the Prime Minister tightened the FDI rules, China was unhappy because $8 billion of Chinese FDI was apparently in the Indian market. My question to you, Mr. Panda, is this reflects that there is an interdependency between India and China. Now, we always looked at China as a competitor, and in fact, the then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh had said that there is enough space for two economies to grow. But now it looks that China did not take us as an adversary, but it was taking its intention right now is more of treating India as an enemy. How do you look at the economy, Mr. Panda? Because you are an economic thinker also. Because in your article, Mr. Panda, on October 30, 2019, you said that India's ease of doing business is improving, and your whole argument was based that how India is improving on the economic front. How do you see our interdependence from China? And if we reduce our interdependence from China, won't it also cause some economic, negative impact in the country?
So let me put things in context. The reality is, during the second half of the 20th century, when globalization was booming, we were on the wrong side of history. We closed our economy and we did not grow economically as well as others. Many small countries became developed, and so did China. Let me again repeat, in 1980, China and India per capita GDP was the same. Then remember something, it grew a lot and we didn't grow quite as fast, although we have also been improving in the last couple of decades. But let me give you a turnaround point. So let's not be so pessimistic. So a few years ago, China had already become 5.5 times of the Indian economy, and everybody was projecting it was going to exceed 6 times of the Indian economy. But actually the reverse happened. The Indian economy grew relatively faster in the last 5-6 years. And so from 5.5 times of India, it has come down to 5 times of India. So I would say the corner has been turned. Now we have to keep this up so that we try to come back closer to parity. Of course, it will take time, but that's the direction that things are going. Secondly, China used this nearly half a century of détente, of, this phrase used to be used, that no bullet has been fired in anger, no life has been lost. They used that to build their infrastructure and to needle India politically and diplomatically through Pakistan, through terrorism, through giving them support in the United Nations Security Council, etc., etc. We all know that. For many decades, we became very complacent that, acha, theek hai, we've got a détente, some kind of peace on the LAC, even though it is not resolved. So we'll just bother about our internal issues, point fingers at each other, and not resolve our problems. So we are paying the price of that disparity, which Modi ji is trying to correct. Now, the investment that is taking place is not just on border roads organization. That is, of course, heavy, but in civilian infrastructure also. The amount of investment in Northeast states, now to Jammu and Kashmir, for railways and for other, is decades overdue. Now, interdependence. Now, so fortunately for us, we are not as interdependent on China as many other countries. Recently, you've seen what they are doing to Australia. Now,
Yes.
politically, China has been pressurizing Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia for a long time. But now, Australia, now remember, Australia is the one country which has had a 30-year unbroken track record of high GDP growth rate, which was broken only now this year due to the corona crisis. And they are now in deep trouble because China is because they asked for an investigation into where the coronavirus came from. China is punishing Australia by trade sanctions and by funding disruption within its universities, by funding protests. So all of this is on the record. You can just go on the internet and look at authentic sources from Australian Parliament and other sources and see that. So fortunately, we are not at that level of interdependence. I'll conclude this by saying the following. If we had lost any more time, if another 5 or 10 years had gone by, it would have been impossible to correct it, as other countries are finding out. Now, you mentioned phones. Remember, in the last 6 years, the Modi government has made a dramatic impact on mobile phones. We are now the world's second largest manufacturer of mobile phones. So that's a very dramatic, and my friend Minister Ravi Shankar Prasad ji has set a public target that we want to become the world's largest producer of mobile phones. There was a controversy just yesterday on the internet, you may have seen, when General Atta Hasnain,
Yes.
retired general of the army, pointed out that a family member of his, instead of buying a Chinese
Use
phone,
the
decided
Samsung.
to
Yes.
buy a
The
Samsung
Samsung.
phone made in India. Now,
Yes.
so things are changing very dramatically, and I think India is going to be catching up very, very, very quickly. And so this interdependence problem is less for us, and we have caught it just in time.
In my last conversation, which I had with the former vice chairman of the Niti Aayog, Arvind Panagria, Mr. Panda, yes. Mr. Panagria was of this opinion that at the essence of India's strength lies that we should become a $5 trillion economy and a $10 trillion economy, with the Prime Minister also envisioned. And he advocated that rather than looking at boycott, he was of the opinion that Atmanirbhar Bharat can change India's economic journey if implemented in letter and spirit. He said that we should look at FTAs with like-minded developed and developing countries. What is your view on this, Mr. Panda? Because my point of view on and why do I ask you is that I feel that the era of non-aligned movement has passed, and now India needs to choose its friends, and what rightly India is doing under Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Do you feel that signing FTAs with like-minded developed and developing countries will further build India's economic strength?
First of all, Professor Panagaria is a good friend of mine,
That's why
and
yeah.
I'm broadly in agreement with many things. On this particular issue, I'm partially in agreement.
Okay.
So regarding the so-called taking advantage of China, I would again point out just what I said a little bit earlier. Look what they're doing to Australia, because Australia has followed exactly that policy. The more dependent a country's economy gets with another economy, normally traditional economists have said it's the so-called if two countries trade more, then they fight less. But China is disproving that because they are not behaving as expected. And
Yes.
so we don't want to land up where Australia has landed up or where other Southeast Asian countries have landed up over the past decade or so. That's number one. Number two, Professor Panagare is absolutely right. We should use Atmanirbhar Bharat to boost India. We can do that in many ways. I have also suggested to use nudge principles.
Yes.
Apart from using bans and tariffs, those have many other factors, for example, WTO agreements and so on and so forth. We can also use nudge principles. I'm glad to see the government of India is already applying some of those nudge principles. For example, to prominently show country of origin. Secondly, to ask e-commerce sites to to use an algorithm that gives viewing priority to made in India products. Things like this. And people like us have been asking, we have Indian apps that are just as good as some of these apps like TikTok. We have Raposo, we have Chingari. We should be promoting these things. So I would say the following regarding FTAs. Now, India started signing FTAs with many countries over the past 2 decades. We've had a bit of a mixed experience. And the reason for that is very simple. And the reason for that is when you have an FTA, both sides are supposed to benefit, but we would only benefit if our economy is getting stronger. Now, we had many, many hurdles. So with an FTA, we were importing more, but we were not able to export more to that country because of our hurdles of land, our hurdles of high interest rates, our hurdles of a huge red tape in labor laws. Now, in these last 6 years, the Modi government has thrown out hundreds, well over 1,000 antiquated laws, some of them from British times. Now, a little bit earlier, we talked about the ease of doing business index. Now, that's not a fantasy. India was indeed more than, worse than 140 out of 180 odd countries. And now we have become 60 something. The Prime Minister's stated objective is first, we must get into the top 50, and then we must get into the top 20 and so on. So as we have to do that. So here, last thing, during this corona crisis, apart from the economic stimulus, which is very large, one of the very big things that has been done is many macro policy decisions. So in one stroke, 4.5 lakh hectares of land has been made available, which is being held by PSUs. Now, we have many, many projects that didn't happen in India because of land acquisition problems. I'm from Odisha. A 53,000 crore steel plant from Korea could not happen because land could not be acquired. Similarly, easing of credit facilities. Ask anybody in business, especially medium and small businesses, they'll tell you that the interest rates are too high compared to our competitors in China and other places. So here, things have started changing. In terms of simplifying other rules and ease of doing business, the one thing that is holding us back from getting into the top 50 is precisely what we were talking earlier, is contract enforcement, because our judicial process is so backlogged. So we are working on all of these things. I think our internal competitiveness increasing has to be kept hand in hand to signing more FTAs.
Mr. Panda, I can see the passion when you speak on economy. I want to take a public question before moving on to my next topic, and this question is coming from Shantanu Mohanty, and a lot of people from Odisha are joining Mr. Panda, which reflects your popularity. Why can't 5G technology like QA or Nokia be managed in India? Can you answer this question in short?
Very easily. Now, the 5G technology is a revolutionary technology, but remember, almost every developed country in the world has concerns about this technology coming from China.
Correct.
Now, you are aware of it. Britain has a major controversy going on. America has a major controversy going on. Only small countries that cannot afford to resist Chinese might, either economic or military, they are not raising their voice. So we have to do what is in our best interest. Now, there is 5G technology. The Chinese have been a little bit ahead on 5G technology. But that's a little odd because China is not known for innovation. Innovation requires open societies. Yes. China is known for mass production. China is known for cheap production. It is not known for innovation. So there are many allegations, especially in the West, about how come China has gone a little bit ahead in 5G technology. And there are allegations of infringement of patents and copyrights and outright corporate espionage and theft of technology from the universities of US. These allegations are there. Now, there are other 5G technologies coming out, which are much more open, which are subject to audit, where we don't have national security concern. Just remember, if we have concern about commercial apps for videos, which are stealing data from India and the servers are kept in China, should we not have a bigger concern about multi-billion-dollar huge global company based out of that country running our 5G systems?
Yes.
So we do have to be concerned.
Absolutely, Mr. Panda. And I would say that always distrust the Chinese first rather than trusting them. And now, after the Indian-China thing, I want to go back to politics because this is what is the heat of the moment. And now I will draw your attention to global politics and not national politics right now. Mr. Panda, on December 28, 2019, you had, in fact, you were one of the prominent speakers in the Oxford Union debate. and you very passionately advocated how removal of Article 370 was in India's interest, and also how 106 modern laws did not apply to this current union territory of Jammu and Kashmir, then the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And viewers should note that for the first time in Jammu and Kashmir, 62 lakh Valmiki Dalits will now get domicile status just because of after removal of Article 370. But Mr. Panda, my worry is that you have now foreign politicians commenting on India's domestic affair, and Joe Biden, the Democrat presidential nominee, says that he seeks restoration of people rights in Kashmir and is disappointed with CA and NRC. It pains me, Mr. Panda. And why does it pain me is because Mr. Joe Biden looks to know nothing when he speaks on CA and NRC. But is it also not your weakness, Mr. Panda, that globally you are not able to advocate the message of CA and NRC in an effective manner? Or do you feel that this is part of a nexus, and this nexus is working inside India, and this nexus has ties globally?
So let me start with asking a rhetorical question. Yeah. When was it that foreign politicians did not comment on India and did not give advice to us? Is this a new thing? So unfortunately, we set into that mold of thinking right from Prime Minister Nehru's time onwards. And we got used to being lectured by others. Things are changing. Now, you'll find the US president very often complimenting Prime Minister Modi and complimenting India as a whole. Things are changing. Now, regarding the Jammu and Kashmir issue, thank you for referring to that Oxford Union debate. I urge any of your viewers interested to check out, it's on YouTube. You can go to the link and see the debate. The fact is, Article 370 was the only article in India's constitution which had the word temporary in front of it. Absolutely. So you can argue whether temporary means few weeks or few months or few years, but after 70 years, there was no issue. Secondly, it is a fact that 106 Indian laws were not applicable. So as a result, until Article 370 was abrogated, in Jammu and Kashmir, child marriage was still legal. Discrimination against Dalits was still legal. Discrimination against LGBTQ community was still legal. Discrimination against women's ownership of property was still legal. Now, nobody can stand for these things in a modern 21st century nation. So, in fact, regarding Vice President Joe Biden, former Vice President Joe Biden, who is the presumptive Democratic nominee for the US, I have responded to that in a Twitter and pointed out these things. Most times, many Western politicians are not even aware of the issues concerning other parts of the world. So they have, they have advisors, and many of these advisors are the so-called woke left, and they advise them to come up with these statements. So I don't think, when he said that those rights should be reinstated in Kashmir, I don't think he's even aware that he is talking about reinstating child marriage, reinstating discrimination against LGBTQ. So I pointed that out. So the reality is, we did not do enough to spread the message about India. This Prime Minister has been extremely energetic, going all over the world and building the brand of India, brand India. So you will see more and more global leaders. See, recently you've had many heads of government around the world complimenting India, thanking India for helping out with medicines and other things during the corona crisis.
Sorry to interject you, because I want to ask two more questions, because I'm really short of time and you are a busy man. You said that you have to leave at 4:45 and I have 5 minutes on the clock to ask you.
All right.
Mr. Panda, let me put it bluntly. Are you worried that if the Democrats win the US presidential election, it will harm the Indian interest? Are you too invested? People say that you are too invested in Donald Trump coming back into United States.
Let me make this very clear. Yeah. Now, it is as an Indian politician and public figure, I cannot have any preference as to who the Americans elect. Whoever they elect, we will work with. Now, remember, Prime Minister Modi had an equally strong relationship with Barack Obama, who was a Democrat. And in fact, it's a larger issue because if you look at the US-India relationship, it has been improving steadily over the last 20 years through
Yeah.
various administrations on both sides. But particularly in the last 5, 6 years, uh, Modi ji has taken it to a different level altogether with both a Democratic president as well as a Republican president. So, it is our job to inform and educate Western publics as well as their politicians and their civil servants and diplomats, and we will keep doing that. I'm sure we will be able to work with whoever the Americans decide to elect, and that is,
Do you
that
have
can't
any
be a
prediction
factor
on this,
in our.
Mr. Panda? Do you want to
Hello?
predict who's winning? Do you want to predict who's winning?
No, I don't want to. I don't want to predict, but I can say that things can change very dramatically. The last election in 2016 was a
Yeah.
complete surprise. All the pollsters got it wrong, but there is a hidden
I'll
majority
go
out
to you.
there.
Get it right, Mr. Panda. Don't worry. Let me move to the second question. Just I have two more questions. We are running short of time. Mr. Panda, you've categorically said this, and in fact, you've been very vocal on how Prime Minister has changed India's perception globally. Yes, I do not deny that. In fact, I feel that when these people lecture us, India should also start lecturing them on their domestic policies. Then they will be better. But Mr. Panda, do you worry that when China can invest $4.5 million, not invest, beg your pardon, can fund the Washington Post by $4.5 million and another $6 million to Wall Street, there are many, Chinese agents who are on the payrolls of the Chinese unofficially inside our country who want to parade the Chinese narrative, and you should act against them, and you are worrying that if you act against them, they will say that you are authoritarian in your nature and your actions.
So listen, it may make us feel good to lecture back to those abroad who are lecturing to us, and maybe sometimes that is called for. But at other, most of the time we should gauge what is in our best interest. And sometimes a behind the scenes chat can achieve more for us. But as necessary, we can also lecture. I did it, as I told you, with response to Vice President Biden's comments. Now, yes, it is a fact that there is a debate in America about Chinese money going into universities, into laboratories, technologies, and now the media. Everybody knows that many in the media. You mentioned Washington Post, but there are many others who have
Yes.
taken funding from Chinese sources. So this is, of course, an issue of concern. This is how they build influence. Now, remember, as I reiterate again, India may be behind China in catching up and building up, but we are also building up. So, for example, if you look at international aid funding, until a few years ago, India was a net receiver of aid. But in the last decade or so, India has become a net giver of aid. Look at
Yes.
Afghanistan. For
Yes.
Afghanistan's reconstruction, next to America, India is the highest donor of aid to build their parliament, to build hospitals. So we are doing a lot of good things. We should, perhaps
The
as
Chinese
our
agents
economy
inside India,
grows, we
Panda.
should
The
also be
Chinese
able to
agents
influence
inside India.
media in other
Sorry to
countries.
interject you. The Chinese agents inside India, Mr. Panda. What we need to act
No,
against the
so
Chinese agents inside India.
there is no doubt that there are many people in India, as today Honorable Home Minister pointed out, that they are saying things exactly in line with what Pakistan is saying, exactly in line what China is saying. So that's rather obvious. You also have other people, in various fields, including in academia, including in journalism. Now, because we are a free country, people get away with a lot of things. But we must do more to ensure, just like this Modi government is cleaning up this whole mess of foreign funding for many activists. And
Correct.
the foreign funding of activists in many cases were not even being reported to the Reserve Bank of India, which is a minimum requirement of law. They were being used for purposes other. They were being brought in for medical purposes. They were being used for some other purposes. So a very strong action has been taken. So wherever there is a money trail, of course, action should be taken. But again, you can't be taking knee-jerk action. But you will see more and more exposure of those people who have a
People
vested
who
interest and
constantly
their
warn
money trail.
Mr. Panda against these Chinese agents. And my last question to you, and this last question, Mr. Panda, is sourced from a comment. There are many of your fans who are joining on this. One of your fans, Suchita Vatsal, says, not only Odisha, but people from all over India admire Mr. Panda's intellect. Mr. Panda, a personal question. Everybody's is on the show admiring your intellect. Should we expect, or are we expecting, or do you wish that we expect that we see you in a larger role in the government, is there is a lot of talk about cabinet reshuffle taking place. Do you expect that, Mr. Panda, or do you wish us to expect that? Yes, that's my last
First of
question.
all, first of all, I want to thank Sujita ji for her kind comments. Secondly, anybody who has followed my career will
Yeah.
see that I have always treated any positions as a byproduct. I have
Okay.
always worked with a mission to improve India, to improve my home state, to improve relations with other countries. So any position has always been a byproduct. And I have never stipulated or never demanded or never asked for any positions. I think I have built a certain credibility based on my activities and my actions. So as far as what my role will be, whatever, I'm part of the party that is not just India's largest, but the world's largest. And it's a open, transparent party that recognizes talent, unlike some of the opposition parties. I'm very happy doing what I'm doing. I'm very fulfilled. I hold a position in the party. It gives me a lot of satisfaction to be out there in the field. I've gone to nearly 20 states of India in the last 1 year for party activities on the ground. And that gives me a lot of satisfaction. So whatever the future holds, I'm somebody who takes it with an open mind and sanguinity.
Well, on that note, Mr. Panda, I would like to thank you for sparing time and engaging in this very genuine, frank conversation. And as promised, we have finished this conversation in time. Keep yourself safe during the time of COVID. Keep working and hope to see you soon in another conversation sometime in near future. Thank you, Mr. Panda.
Thank you, Mr. Bandari. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.